The first time he laughed at my business plan, I stood there frozen, as if the air itself had turned to ice. His chuckle echoed through the room, as loud and unforgiving as a storm. "You really think you can make this work?" he asked, his eyes glinting with mockery. It wasn't just the words that stung. It was the certainty in his voice. I had believed in my idea, in my vision, but to him I was just a fool, chasing an impossible dream. He leaned back in his chair, eyes glancing at the ceiling, dismissing me without a second thought. It was as though my failure was already written in stone. I wanted to argue, to tell him how wrong he was, but all I could do was nod, holding back the rush of frustration. How could someone who should have believed in me be the one to crush my hopes so effortlessly? I knew then that I'd never let him see me fail. Not now, not ever. His laughter would be the last time I allowed him to mock me. I would prove him wrong. I couldn't look at him anymore, couldn't stand the arrogance that radiated from him. The worst part was, deep down, I knew this moment wouldn't be the last of it. The uncle who had once been a role model, a source of support, had now become a shadow of disdain. There had always been a competitive spark between us, but this time, it felt different. His laugh was more than just mocking. It was dismissive of everything I'd worked for. I wanted to be angry, to lash out, but instead, I felt numb. My thoughts raced, but the silence between us grew louder. The man who had told me to follow my dreams was now the one trying to crush them. The dream that once felt like something attainable, something real, now seemed further away than ever. But I knew one thing: I would never let him see me break. My resolve hardened like steel. The fire in me was just beginning to burn. The days after his laugh were harder than I expected. Every time I walked into the office, I could feel his voice echoing in my head. "You really think you can make this work?" It haunted me. I tried to push it away, but it lingered like a shadow. My business started picking up, slowly at first, but I still felt the weight of his dismissal. The emails, the late nights, the constant pressure, none of it felt like enough. The doubt he planted in me had rooted deep. I couldn't escape it. At night I lay awake, thinking of my plan, my pitch, every detail, wondering if I had missed something. The truth was, I wasn't sure anymore. But I refused to give up. I couldn't let him be right, and maybe that was the only thing keeping me going. The thought of proving him wrong, it was a dangerous fuel. But at least it was something. It wasn't long before the confrontation came. One evening, after a series of missed calls and emails, I walked into his office, my nerves barely holding up. The air between us felt electric, thick with unspoken words. He barely glanced up from his desk when I entered. The same smug look was still there, but this time I wasn't going to let it slide. "You think I can't make it?" I asked, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. He looked at me, and for a moment, there was silence. "It's not that I don't think you can," he said slowly, leaning back in his chair. "It's that you don't have what it takes." That was all it took to break the dam inside me. My fists clenched, and every ounce of restraint I had evaporated. "You don't get it, do you?" I spat. "This isn't about you." It never was. His expression didn't change. "Then why are you here?" he asked, almost casually. And in that moment, I knew I was done proving anything to him. I walked out of his office that night feeling something I hadn't expected: relief. Confrontation was over, but more importantly, I had finally spoken my truth. It didn't matter that he was still indifferent. What mattered was that I had taken the first step. But deep down I knew the real battle was just beginning. His words stung, but I wasn't going to let them define me. My vision, my dream, was bigger than his laughter. As I walked out of the building, the cool evening air hit my face, and I took a deep breath. The city felt vast, like an open field, and I was ready to run through it. I would prove him wrong. Not for him, but for me. And as I looked up at the city skyline, I felt the weight of the world suddenly seem just a little lighter. I could do this. I would do this. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when I believed in people, when I trusted that family would stand by you no matter what. But those days were long gone, buried beneath the weight of betrayal. My uncle had been my mentor, my guide, for as long as I could remember. He'd given me advice, offered me opportunities, and told me to chase my dream. I thought we were partners in this journey to something greater. But when it came down to it, his mockery wasn't just about me. It was about him too. There was a part of him that never believed in me. He saw me as a threat to his legacy, to his own achievements. And maybe that was why it hurt so much. It wasn't just rejection, it was a denial of everything I had worked for, everything I had believed. The worst part, I wasn't angry. I was numb, and I hated myself for it. I remember the days before everything changed. I was younger, full of hope and naive. My uncle would tell me stories of how he built his empire from nothing, how he fought tooth and nail to get to where he was. I hung on every word, believing that if I just worked hard enough, if I followed his advice, I could do the same. But that was before I saw the cracks in his facade. That was before I realized how hollow his words really were. At first I thought it was just a phase, his coldness, his dismissiveness. I thought maybe he was just tired or overwhelmed by his own success. But it never stopped. It only grew stronger. I had become nothing more than a nuisance to him, someone to laugh at instead of someone to be proud of. It was a harsh lesson, one that shattered everything I thought I knew about ambition, about family, about loyalty. The shift happened slowly at first. The laughter, the offhand remarks, the casual dismissals, each one was a small cut, hardly noticeable at the time. But like 1,000 paper cuts, they added up. At first, I made excuses for him. He was busy. He was stressed. But the truth was undeniable. Every time I tried to share my success, he'd find a way to belittle it. My accomplishments were never enough for him. He wanted to see me fail, not because he didn't care, but because he feared I would outshine him. The very man who had taught me to dream was now the one trying to suffocate those dreams with his cold indifference. It made me question everything. Was this all just a game to him? A way to keep me under his control? Slowly, I started to build my business without him. And the more I built, the more I felt like a stranger in his world. It wasn't until I met Maya that things began to change. She was a breath of fresh air, someone who saw my potential, not my failures. Maya was the kind of person who believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. Yeah, she pushed me when I was ready to give up, reminded me of why I started this journey in the first place. Her words were simple, but they struck deep. You're not doing this for anyone but yourself. It was the first time in months that I felt like I had a purpose again. With her support, I began to rebuild my confidence. It wasn't just about proving my uncle wrong anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could do this, no matter the odds. I didn't need his approval. I had Maya's, and that was enough. With Maya's support, the business began to grow. I took on more clients and every step forward felt like a victory. But despite my progress, the voice of doubt, the echo of my uncle's laughter, still followed me. There were nights when I felt like giving up, when I wondered if the years of rejection had broken something inside me. But then I would think of Maya's words, and remember why I couldn't stop now. I wasn't just building a business. I was building myself. Slowly, but surely, I was becoming the person I had always wanted to be, the person I had forgotten existed beneath the self-doubt and fear. And with every little success, I could feel the weight of my uncle's skepticism starting to fade away. I was doing this on my terms, and that felt better than any approval he could ever give. As the business gained momentum, so did the pressure. What once felt like a dream now felt like a relentless high-stakes game. Every decision, every move, seemed to have the weight of the world on it. But it wasn't just the clients or the deadlines that kept me up at night. It was the constant feeling that I was being watched. My uncle's shadow still loomed large, despite the distance between us. Every time I hit a milestone, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for me to fail, just as he had always predicted. The more I succeeded, the more I felt like I was running a race against someone who wasn't even there. It was exhausting, mentally and emotionally. And yet, I couldn't stop. There was something inside me, something raw and fierce, that refused to quit. It was as if my success was now tied to his failure. The more I climbed, the more I needed to reach the top to prove to myself that I could do this, that I could stand tall, even without his approval. Then came the message. A single email from an unknown account. It wasn't much, just a few lines of text, but it hit me harder than I expected. "Your uncle is concerned about you," it said. "He doesn't think you can make it, not without help." My heart dropped. I hadn't heard from him in months, and now this? It felt like a challenge. Like he was trying to pull me back, trying to remind me of my place. The words felt like a punch to the gut, even though they were so simple. I had come so far, and yet it was clear. He was still watching, still waiting for me to slip. I had thought I'd finally broken free of his influence, but this was a reminder that he would always be there, lurking in the background, trying to drag me down. It made me question everything I had done so far. Was I really doing this for me? Or was I still just fighting his ghost? I tried to shake it off, tried to convince myself that it didn't matter. But every time I looked at my phone, every time I checked my email, the fear crept in again. I became obsessed with the idea that my uncle was still pulling the strings, that somehow, in some way, he was controlling my every move. It wasn't just paranoia. It was a cold, creeping reality that I couldn't escape. I started questioning every decision I made, every client I took on, every step I took towards success. Was I really making these choices? Or was I just trying to prove him wrong? The thought consumed me. I began to lose sight of my original vision. I had become so focused on winning, on showing him that I could succeed, that I had lost the very thing that had driven me in the first place. I was no longer doing it for me. I was doing it for him. And that realization hit harder than anything he had ever said to me. It all came to a head when I saw him again. My uncle. Not in person, but in the most unexpected of places. My office. He had arranged a meeting, and there he was, standing in the doorway like he had every right to be there. His smug smile was all too familiar. "I've been keeping an eye on you," he said casually, as if we were old friends. I wanted to scream, to tell him everything I had been feeling, all the anger and resentment that had built up inside me. But instead, I stood frozen, watching him like he was a ghost from the past. "I can help you," he said. "You know I have the resources to take you further." For a moment, I was tempted to let him back in, to take the easy way out. But I knew it would be a mistake. His help always came at a price I was no longer willing to pay. I told him no. It was a simple word, but it felt like the hardest thing I had ever done. He didn't take it well, of course. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice cold, calculating. But I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt in control. My decision was mine, and it wasn't about proving him wrong anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my vision, my future. The weight that had been suffocating me for so long began to lift. I had made the choice, and now I had to live with it. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I knew I was stronger now. Stronger than the man who had once controlled me with his mockery and his doubt. I had taken my first real step into the future, and it felt like the beginning of something much bigger than my uncle's influence. The decision to reject my uncle felt like a victory at first, but soon it became apparent that the battle was far from over. My business was growing, but with growth came enemies I hadn't anticipated. One evening, I received a call from one of my major investors telling me that they were pulling out. "We've been hearing rumors about your uncle," they said, their voice hesitant but firm. "We can't afford to be associated with any family drama." My stomach dropped. My mind raced back to the message, the one from the unknown email, and the nagging thought that my uncle was still behind the scenes. How far had he gone to make sure I failed? I hadn't known it then, but the rejection wasn't just from him. It was part of a larger scheme. a plan to keep me from becoming more than he was. That realization hit harder than anything he had ever done to me. I wasn't just fighting for success anymore. I was fighting for my survival in a world my uncle had carefully manipulated. The days following that call felt like a blur. I didn't know who I could trust anymore. The rumors were getting louder, and every corner I turned seemed to have another obstacle placed in my path. But the worst part wasn't the investors pulling out. It was the way my uncle was playing everyone, including me. It wasn't just business, it was personal. He was using his power, his influence, to make sure I stayed small, that my success remained a fleeting dream. For the first time, I wondered if I had ever truly been in control of my own fate. My uncle's hand had always been guiding my steps, just hidden beneath layers of encouragement, of false hope. But now, his manipulations were out in the open. The man I had looked up to, the man I thought was my mentor, was nothing more than a puppet master, pulling the strings behind my back. And I had been too blinded by ambition to see it. It wasn't until I ran into Maya that I realized just how deep my uncle's influence had gone. We were sitting in a cafe, trying to discuss the next steps for my business, when she finally spoke the words I had been dreading to hear. "You need to talk to him," she said gently, but her voice was firm. "Your uncle has been using his connections to make sure you don't succeed." I stared at her, disbelief flooding my chest. "What are you talking about?" I asked, the words almost foreign on my tongue. "He's been pulling strings behind the scenes, using his power to sabotage your investors, your partners. He's been trying to push you out without you even knowing it." The shock of her words hit me like a tidal wave. I had always known my uncle was capable of manipulation, but I never imagined he would go this far. My world began to crumble as the reality sank in. Everything I had worked for, the dream I had fought for, had been sabotaged from the start. The revelation hit me harder than I could have imagined. My uncle, the man I had trusted, the one I had looked up to, had been working against me this entire time, and I hadn't seen it. I had been so focused on proving him wrong, on making my own way, that I hadn't realized the most dangerous battle was being fought right under my nose. I felt like a fool. I was angry at him, angry at myself for not seeing the signs. But I couldn't back down now. I couldn't let him win. The stakes had gotten higher, and the fight was no longer just about business. It was about my own self-worth, my own autonomy. It was time to stop playing by his rules and start playing by mine. I had spent years building something from the ground up, and now I would fight to protect it, even if it meant standing up to the person who had shaped me. The first step in confronting my uncle came when I called him, when I demanded answers. I could hear his calm, controlled voice on the other end, and it made my blood boil. "I know what you've been doing," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. "I know you've been sabotaging my business. I don't need your help anymore." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a brief silence before he spoke. "You're making a mistake," he said, his tone cold and final. "You think you can do this on your own? You're not ready. You never were." His words stung, but I refused to let them break me. "I'm ready now," I replied, my voice steady, "and I'm going to do it without you." The line went dead, and for a moment I just stood there, listening to the silence. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a step in the right direction. I had taken control, and no one, not even my uncle, could take that away from me. It all came to a head one rainy afternoon, when everything I had built came dangerously close to falling apart. One of my key clients, who had been with me since the beginning, called to inform me that they were considering dropping my company. "Your uncle reached out to us," they said, their voice laced with uncertainty. "He's offering us a better deal." My heart sank as the realization hit me like a freight train. I knew this wasn't just a coincidence. It was a direct attack. My uncle had once again weaved his web of influence, pulling at the threads of everything I had worked so hard to establish. But this time, it wasn't just business, it was personal. I had fought too long and sacrificed too much to let him take it all away. I wasn't going to let him win. Not again. I gathered everything I had, every ounce of pride, every lesson learned, and made a decision. I would confront him once and for all. It was time to end this. The confrontation with my uncle was inevitable. I called him, demanding a face-to-face meeting, knowing full well that this would be the moment of reckoning. When he entered my office, he was as calm and composed as ever. But I could see it in his eyes. He knew what was coming. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice low, almost mocking. "You think you can take me down? You're not ready for what's coming." I stood up from my desk, my heart pounding. "I don't need your help anymore," I said, my voice steady, but the words felt like they were tearing through me. "You've done enough, and I'm done letting you control me." For a moment, there was silence between us. He took a step forward, but I didn't flinch. "You were never meant to succeed on your own," he said coldly, "and you won't last without me." But this time, I didn't waver. "I've already lasted without you," I replied, my voice unwavering. "And I'll keep going. Without you." My uncle stepped back, eyes narrowing as if calculating his next move. "You're not the first to challenge me," he said, his voice like ice. "But you'll be the first to fail." The words stung, but I didn't let them break me. The truth was, I had already won. I had proven to myself that I could survive without him, that I could thrive on my own, and that was more than I could have ever asked for. "You may be able to destroy businesses, manipulate people, but you'll never take away my self-respect," I said, my words coming out with quiet strength. "You're not the one who decides if I succeed or fail anymore. I am." The finality in my voice caught him off guard, and for a brief moment I saw something in his eyes. Fear, perhaps. Regret? But it was fleeting, and in that moment I knew I had broken free. I was done with him, and done with the man who had controlled me for far too long. The door slammed shut behind him as he left, and I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. For the first time in years, I felt free. It wasn't just the business that had been set in motion. It was my entire life. My uncle had been my anchor, but now he was nothing more than a shadow from the past. I had made it through the storm, and while the future was still uncertain, I knew one thing for sure: I had earned my place. I didn't need him to define my success. I was writing my own story now. The weight of his influence, the constant cloud of doubt he had cast over me, was gone. And with it, I found a freedom I had never known. I was finally in control of my own destiny. The aftermath of the confrontation was both liberating and humbling. The business continued to grow, slowly but steadily. The investors who had pulled away eventually came back, realizing that I was not just some protege of my uncle, but a force to be reckoned with. But more than that, I had learned something valuable. True success isn't about winning battles or proving others wrong. It's about standing firm, staying true to yourself, and knowing when to let go of the things that no longer serve you. I had won, not just in business, but in life. The battle with my uncle had been hard, but it had made me stronger. And as I looked at my reflection in the window, I finally recognized the person staring back at me. It was the person I had always been meant to be. Months passed since the showdown with my uncle, and things were looking up. The business was growing, but there was an emptiness I hadn't anticipated. Success felt distant without the man who'd shaped my path. For years I fought to prove him wrong, but now I saw the real victory. I had fought for myself. His mockery had pushed me forward, but I had finally learned that the true battle was finding my own belief, not his approval. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about me, and that was enough. I never heard from my uncle again. The silence stretched on for months. It wasn't the dramatic end I had expected, but it was freeing. I'd spent so long seeking his approval, but I didn't need it anymore. My business was thriving, and I was finally in control. I had broken free of his shadow, and I wasn't looking back. The truth was, I didn't need to understand him. I only needed to understand myself. My business had evolved. I wasn't the same person I was when I started. I had grown into a leader, confident in my decisions and vision. My team supported me, believing in what I had built. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about moving forward. I had found peace, and that peace was stronger than any victory I could have claimed. I didn't need to fight for approval. I had already won. I needed a break, a moment to breathe. I took a trip to the coast, a quiet escape from everything. The sound of the waves and the endless horizon gave me the peace I hadn't realized I needed. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about my business, my uncle, or anyone else. I was just existing, finding calm. I learned that success wasn't just about building something. It was about finding peace in the process, about learning to approve of myself, not anyone else. When I returned, the world seemed different. The business was still growing, but now it felt like it belonged to me, not my uncle, not anyone else. I had finally let go of the weight of his influence. And with it, I found my own strength. The road ahead wasn't clear, but I was ready for it. I wasn't just building a business. I was building my life, and it was mine to shape. Months had passed, but I still thought about him. My uncle. Not with anger anymore, but with something more distant. His shadow had shaped me, but it no longer had control. I'd fought to prove him wrong, but the real victory was learning to trust myself. Rumors about my uncle still circulated. I'm Sid Kong. He was still pulling strings, trying to undermine me. But I didn't care. My success no longer depended on him. I had learned that the only approval I needed was my own. It was time to let go of the past. One evening, I received a letter from him. I see what you've built, it said. But don't forget, we both know who helped you get here. The words were distant, but they no longer had power. I had already moved on. I didn't need his recognition anymore. That night, I felt an overwhelming sense of freedom. I had fought so hard to break free of his shadow, and now I was free. The next morning, I looked out over the city from my office window, feeling like a new chapter had begun. I never heard from him again, but I no longer needed to. The silence between us was final. I had proven myself, not to him, but to me. And as I looked at the city below, I knew I was ready for whatever came next.